Welcome on this Friday Eve. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here today online opinion editor for the Washington Times, Monica Crowley, Democratic strategist Julie Rogensky, former National Security Council member and veteran of both the Bush and Obama administrations, Jillian Turner, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy. We have a first time on Outnumbered, former Army Green Beret officer and veteran of 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan, Bill Collins is here. And Ben, excuse me. And I was going to say you're outnumbered, but I think you're used to that.
Being outnumbered? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, certainly at home, and I've got wife and 2 girls, and all of our pets are actually. So I'm definitely outnumbered.
So you're at home.
I am. I've got a 2-year-old boy, and I'm trying to get him to help back me up, but that's not working so well.
But he knows
far.
where his bread is buttered, so he goes to mom.
Well, completely. Yes, he's definitely a mama's boy.
Well, forgive my flub. I know that you're Ben, and I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
All right, let's get to it. 100 days and counting, actually fewer than that now, until Americans will vote on the next president. And a brand new Fox News national poll shows Hillary Clinton is leading Donald Trump by 10 points. Trump's Republican allies reportedly are urging him to focus on job number 1, beating Hillary Clinton in November, and not to get sidetracked by disputes with his critics. Former mayor and presidential candidate Rudy Giuliani was on Hannity.
We can defend him against people who are coming after him from this side and that side. He should focus on exactly the things that you're talking about. Why this country can't take 4 years of Hillary Clinton.
So the question is, does Donald Trump believe he needs some sort of campaign reset? Stumping in battleground state of Florida before huge crowds there, Trump said things have never been better.
The campaign is doing really well. It's never been so well united. And we started on June 16th. I would say right now it's the best in terms of being united that it's been since we began. We're doing incredibly well.
And this undeniably big news for Trump and the Republican National Committee. He just all but nullified Hillary Clinton's fundraising advantage. Donald Trump pulled in $82 million last month, mostly in the form of small donations. And it is that big number, Ben, that people look at because it's kind of Barack Obama-like, if you will. Remember, he could get lots of little money. That means you can go back to those people time and time again.
It is, and this is a movement. I think that's what a lot of, certainly Washington, D.C. and some of the coastal, if you look at L.A. and maybe even New York, but certainly D.C., they just never got that this is a movement. And I think that, those numbers right now are showing that, as much as the media is pouncing on Mr. Trump for all the things that he's saying, and a lot of it hasn't been, the best choice of words whatsoever, and the reality is that there's a part of America, 75% of America lives in a rural part, right? And that part of America just hasn't been listened to for years. And those are the ones I think that are sending in these small donations that are giving him a boost that we just, I think, they're shocked to see it in D.C.
Ben, I don't want to miss the obvious with you. So before we go around the couch, I want to ask you from a military perspective how you look at Donald Trump. We saw a man give him a Purple Heart, his own Purple Heart on stage a couple of days ago, but he's also taken some criticism. So from your perspective.
Certainly. Well, I think, what Donald represents, I think, to a lot of people is that last chance, right? If you look at a lot of people, certainly within that part of America that just hasn't had a voice, they're the ones that voted for Bush and Romney and McCain and did what they were supposed to do, but nothing ever changed for them. And so this for them is kind of that last hope. And I think from a military perspective, we want 3 things. We want a leader, and you better be predictable and clear in your goals. I think Trump has been very bold, certainly as a candidate. What he is lacking, I think, in some capacity is just having kind of that clear message and predictability. And for the military personnel, I think they want to see that. But, I've seen polls that, certainly within the military, they prefer Trump over Clinton just because it's, I think we've had too much of a history with the Clintons.
I'm getting a lot of nonverbal from Monica Crowley right now, just nodding. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you that Donald Trump is sitting atop this movement, and he's riding the tiger. He might understand the tiger to a certain degree, but I don't think anybody really has a handle yet on the major realignments that are happening in the United States and across the Western world. Witness the Brexit vote, for example. So there are these cross currents that are happening, and Trump is riding this momentum. The question is whether or not he can sustain it. I think when you look back at his acceptance speech, he did have a very simple message of law and order, economic populism, strong national defense, and defeating a corrupt and rigged system. The question is, can he sustain those themes, strong national defense and the economy and jobs, through November without his tendency to go down these rabbit holes and kind of lose focus, because when he loses focus, his supporters lose focus, the media loses focus, and he ends up at a disadvantage.
Well, one thing is for sure, I mean, you talk about his supporters, some of them do. I mean, when you look at the video from Florida and you had people lining up for that very first event, that town hall yesterday at the Ocean Center in Daytona Beach, they weren't losing focus. They were clearly focused on him. What are your thoughts, Jillian?
I was just thinking about the fundraising piece, and I think, yes, the campaign has overcome tremendous hurdles. I think it was as recently as May that they had like $1 million in the bank account, in the checking account. So they've made huge strides, but I just want to still point out to people the big picture is still a significant lag. I mean, the projections coming out from both sides of the aisle right now put him overall, at the end of the day, having about $500 million less than the Clinton campaign. That's an even bigger hurdle to overcome, and I think that while he continues to attract small-scale donors, which is hugely important, he still has to figure out that other piece, which is the big party donors. I don't think he can do it without them. The Meg Whitman's endorsements and fundraising by the Koch family, folks who have all declined to participate.
I mean, traditionally that might have been true, but we saw Donald Trump defy all the odds that you just talked about in the primary season, and even with Hillary spending so much money in battleground states, they're still relatively close. Now, this new Fox polling shows a double-digit spread for the first time, really. Now you've got 2 convention bounces and a rough week, arguably for both of them. I mean, neither one of them really had a great week because you had a lot of stuff going on. But about the money, talk to me about the money.
Well, the money is important, and Jillian made a very good point. First of all, she's been spending money already, and we can't underestimate how important that is. She's been up on the air in the battleground states, and a lot of them. He has not, and that's something that's very interesting, because what that's done is not only solidified her supporters, but more importantly, it's defined him before he can define himself. And so if he has to play catch-up starting in September, like August is a dead time because people are going to be focused on vacation.
I've heard that.
It is, and also for 2 reasons. Especially this year, the Olympics are going on and off. Nobody's paying attention. People go on vacation. So let's just say that he's going to really have to go up on TV in a very strong way in September in places like Pennsylvania, where there's a Senate race to compete with, in places like Ohio, where there's a Senate race to compete with, and Florida, certainly, where there's a Senate race to compete with. The reason she's had the airwaves to herself for so long is very effective for her, and that's something that you have to bear in mind.
I love you to pieces, and they've got to fix your microphone.
I know, apparently.
So they're going to give you some new batteries.
They've silenced me.
So no, never. We would never do that. Let's one more thought from you, Ben, before we move on. So you're talking about these small donations from people and just how many people this really speaks to. 82 million across the month. That's millions of people potentially. And so what it does communicate, I would imagine, to his adversaries, his opponents would be, I'm sure many of them are loving, but his opponents is that, you know, this is a bigger thing than we thought. You called it a movement. We hadn't really heard those words against Hillary Clinton since the days of Bernie Sanders.
It is, but I think we've seen within Trump, certainly like a day is a long time, much less a week, much less all the way to November. So it's going to come down to what's going to happen between now and November, and who's going to get out that vote, who's going to get their people to come out to the polls, and that's going to be a big difference. That's going to make the difference.
Interesting. All right. Well, meanwhile, that new Fox poll also offers up some possible encouragement for the Trump campaign. It shows the Republican nominee is beating Hillary Clinton on 2 top issues. I can't wait to ask Monica about this. The economy and defeating the Islamic State savages. Trump is leading Clinton on the economy by 5 points and leading by 9 points on who voters trust more to destroy the Islamic State savages. I said it twice in 2 paragraphs. I know, and I get a thumbs up because people love it when I call them that for some reason.
Well, you know, what's interesting about this is that Mrs. Clinton is walking a very fine line. On the one hand, she served as President Obama's chief steward of American foreign policy for 4 years as Secretary of State, so she can't put that much distance between herself and the president's record for obvious reasons. On the same hand, the American people are living this economy on the ground every day, and they're living the escalating national security threats on the ground every day. We just had another presumably terror attack on the streets of London. The American people know that the threat is already here.
American woman was killed in that.
That is correct. So Trump's big argument is, we've already tried it your way, Mrs. Clinton, and it has been a dismal failure, whether it's on the economic side or on the national security side. And if he sticks to those 2 themes, you know, usually jobs and the economy are the #1 issue for most voters, and that is also true this year. But this year also national security is running even as the most important issue.
Well, can I actually just jump in on what Monica said, because I think it's so relevant? You just made an incredible pitch for why Donald Trump should be the next president. You know who's not making that pitch? Donald Trump, because he's too busy going after Paul Ryan. He's too busy going after John McCain. He's too busy going after Gold Star parents. The pitch essentially is, if you're happy with the way the economy is going, most people are not. If you're happy with the way national security is going, many people are concerned. Stick to the status quo. But if you're unhappy, look at Donald Trump. The problem is that Donald Trump is not making that pitch.
And
he's
there's
off
a
message.
big gaping. I would just add to what Julie said. There's a big gaping hole in the form of a plan to fight ISIS, right? I mean, this is the campaign that has
by the Obama administration.
No, by the Trump campaign has staunchly refused to put forward their plans for combating ISIS, right? So while I understand from an emotional point of view, Americans might rally behind what Donald Trump is saying, his stump speech on the issue is very powerful.
Interesting.
But there's nothing to back it up right now.
But the Obama administration, too, is missing that overarching plan, because President Obama even said a few months ago, well, not even a few, just a couple months ago, that we don't have a complete strategy. Libya, you know, some people are, Ambassador Bolton likens it to whack-a-mole. You're going to whack them there, and then they're going to pop someplace else. So is it an opportunity then for Donald Trump to step up and say, you know what, I am going to give you some meats and bones of what I was talking about in terms of a plan?
Yeah, look, I think so. I haven't seen a plan to win Afghanistan in 15 years. I mean, from the day that we started. So, and here we are, still with, you know, more ground that the Taliban have had since 2001 with, and we're going to keep 10,000. You know, the thing that I took from that poll was, you know, they both had the same untrustworthy numbers, but people chose the resume of Hillary Clinton, and they said the temperament of Hillary Clinton. So Trump can't do anything about his resume in terms of having 40 years of government, you know, qualification. And the question was, is somebody qualified? Is Trump or Hillary more qualified to be president? He can do something about his temperament, though. So I think if he can reel it in, be disciplined, and stay on message, and start presenting some of these plans that Jillian said, we could actually see something turn around.
Real quickly, Monica, how tricky is that, though? Because if you tweak it too much, then you're not the genuine person that people have fallen in love with.
Right, and then you lose the essence of Donald Trump. He is an unconventional, unorthodox candidate, and that has gotten him this far. It's gotten him the Republican nomination. I think when it comes to national security issues, it is true that he doesn't have the experience, but the one thing that he is projecting that is attracting so many voters to him is leadership and strength. And that is the kind of thing he should be projecting when he's talking about the national security threats that are growing under the current president.
Sure.
All right. Glad you're here. This is fun. All right. New fallout from reports that the U.S. paid Iran $400 million in foreign bills, which coincided, they say, with the release of American hostages after that controversial nuclear deal. Now the Justice Department wants answers as well, because the DOJ actually rejected that payment. So somebody overruled the DOJ. How did that happen? And slightly different
in January that coincided with the release of American hostages. Now the Wall Street Journal is reporting that officials at the Justice Department were not happy with the timing or the manner of the $400 million payment. But the State Department reportedly overruled the DOJ's concerns. Officials still insist that the money exchanged had nothing to do with the release of those American hostages. But some lawmakers want answers. House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz has called Secretary of State John Kerry to appear at a hearing about the money transfer, while others say it looks a lot like a ransom payment. Listen.
This was clearly a ransom payment to release those hostages. I and many others had been sharply critical of the president for not negotiating the release of all these hostages before he even sat down at the table to talk about the nuclear deal. So I suspect that he wanted to have these hostages gone, even though the price of it was $400 million in small unmarked bills flying into Iran on an unmarked aircraft like it was a drug cartel transaction.
Well, it certainly looked like a ransom payment to me based on the timing, Ben. What's curious to me is that if there's one international entity that this administration has supported without reservation over the last 7.5 years, it's the Iranian regime. It refused to back the Iranian people in 2009 when they were revolt against the regime. You had the nuclear deal, which sets them on a glide path toward a nuclear weapon. You have this kind of ransom payment. You have the administration refusing to try to push back against their presence in Iraq. You've been to these places. You know the enemy firsthand. What is your sense of what this administration did here?
Well, they set us up for failure in the future, in my opinion. I mean, there's no way. I mean, this money we froze in '79, right? So it's literally been that long. So of all the days, and just for fun, I actually counted it up, and it's like 13,000 days since we took that money. So it's not a coincidence that the one day that we send this money over, you know, through with euros and francs on the middle of the night on a pallet out of a Gulf Stream, and I mean, come on.
Seems like it sounds like a James Bond movie. I mean, I remember one where there was a plane filled with cash. It's like it's almost stolen.
Going to the enemy
from the idea.
An enemy that, yeah, exactly, an enemy that funded. I mean, look at all the people we're going against right now. You look at, you know, the Assad regime. You know, they're supporting the Assad regime and what's happening, you know, in Syria. They've killed almost 500,000 of their own civilians. You know, Iran was behind overthrowing the government, or trying to, in Yemen, backing the Houthis. But more importantly, you know, the Iranians were directly responsible with killing friends of mine. Actually, you know, my son's middle name is named after a friend of mine that I lost in Iraq that was killed by an EFP, one of those explosively formed projectiles that was Iranian technology that was brought over by the Iranian, you know, Quds Force. So we're literally supporting somebody that it's not just a theoretical enemy. I mean, these are people that have directly killed Americans and our men and women in uniform, and that's, to me, deplorable.
And Jillian, yeah, to Ben's point about this, doesn't this put a bounty on the head of every American if they know that they can get $100 million per American, as they did here for 4 Americans, $400 million? Doesn't that put us all at risk?
I'm just as critical of this payment closeout as the two of you are. I was tremendously critical of the Iran nuclear deal because of the substance of the deal. I don't think this was a ransom payment, and I think it's important to distinguish between the two. The reason I don't think this was a ransom payment is because this prisoner exchange was already hugely unbalanced in January when it took place. The Iranian regime released 4 American hostages. I call them hostages because they were being held illegally by the government.
Well, they were
there.
hostages.
In exchange.
They call themselves hostages.
Yes. In exchange, we released 7 Iranians who were legally detained inside this country, and we also stopped extradition charges for 14 others, so a total of 21. We didn't need $400 million to sweeten the deal. What I worry about with this is the optics of $1.4 billion that we've agreed in a payment to the Iranian regime coinciding with the time of the timing. That's the optics that bothers me, not so much the
Is it but let me ask you this. Is it the optics that bother you, or is the fact that this so what bothers you? Because to me, I get you on the optics. The optics are horrible. The optics will always be horrible with the Iranians because they're a horrible regime, and anytime you give them money, the optics will be horrible. The question to me is this. It's not like we haven't traded for, and by the way, you're right, this wasn't a hostage exchange, but it's not, even if it were, which is what you seem to be implying, it's not like we haven't traded for hostages before. We certainly did during the Reagan administration. And so the question to me is, this is money that The Hague or whoever in the Netherlands, whatever entity decided they were entitled to. Therefore, we have one of two choices. Do we leave our American hostages in Tehran or wherever they were being held at Evin prison in the worst conditions possible, or do we trade for them with money that apparently the Iranians were already entitled to? And to me, I don't like leaving Americans on the field.
There were years of courts that went through the fact that they were not entitled to that money, which was why they hadn't gotten it yet. And, you know, to your point, Jillian, just because they made a bad deal doesn't mean that it wasn't a deal for ransom. You're absolutely right. Forgiving all of that, those 21 that were already in process, the 7 that were behind bars, you're right. That's kind of like Bo Bergdahl for the 5 Taliban commanders. So what price do you put on an American life? We're just talking specifically about the timing. Look, many of us met Jason Rezaian at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He had only been home a few days. Such a blessing that those Americans came home. That's not the point. But the timing of this is stinky.
And the Iranians themselves have said to their own people it was a ransom.
Of course
payment.
they did.
So perception is
But
reality.
even if you assume it was a ransom,
right.
even if you assume, that it wasn't a ransom payment, my point is that it's still as bad. That's what I'm trying to say. I personally don't believe it was.
The biggest sponsor of terror in this administration with a straight face is trying to tell us the $400 million is not going to be plowed back into the support of terrorism. Okay, moving on. A new dynamic may be emerging in the 2016 race. Why some say Mike Pence is taking the lead in unifying Republicans after a bumpy week for Donald Trump. We'll talk about all of that and more. Plus, Hillary Clinton appearing to stoke some fear of Donald Trump as a way to unify Democrats. Is that a good strategy, or is she trying to distract from her own record?
Khan's service after controversy erupted over Trump's comments about his parents. And last week, after Trump called on Russia to find Hillary Clinton's missing emails, Pence warned that there would be, quote, serious consequences if Russia was interfering in U.S. elections. I'm going to come to you, Ben, on this and just get your thoughts.
Well, look, I think that, the reality is when I look at this, I feel like Trump is still fighting a primary. and he doesn't have to fight a primary anymore. He won the primary. You know, he has to start thinking about the general election, and that has to be a pivot in certainly messaging. I don't believe these reports that I see that come out that say, the campaign is just, it's imploding and it's all disaster, because I think most of that's going to come from, the left media that just jumps on every time they just love to get that. But, I do think that we have to see it come from, Donald Trump. I don't think they're going to be able to get away with Governor Pence being the one that's going to be constantly coming out and saying, well, what we really meant. Well, what we really meant.
You know what's interesting about what you're saying? So yesterday we were reporting the word intervention was being used with regard to Republicans. And by the end of the day, I had had so much blowback from other journalists who've known me my whole life, my whole career, and on social media about where is that word coming from. So John Roberts was on with us a little bit yesterday on Shepard Smith Reporting, and I'm hearing him talk, and I'm thinking, let me check yahoo.com. I go, and I mean, the headlines, that word was there like 50 times. And normally I would say, no, there's no way that people are just kind of putting that word in there. I started to have some real doubts yesterday. And then to see Donald Trump with those two huge crowds in Florida, then I'm thinking, okay, what was really going on with what was being reported?
But crowds don't equal support. I mean, just because you have big crowds coming out.
No, but he stayed focused.
He stayed focused on everything he shouldn't stay focused on. I mean, when you can't have Mike Pence as the adult in the room babysitting the Republican nominee.
Is that what you think is happening?
That's exactly what's going on.
I don't think they needed an intervention. I think Donald Trump saw the polling and the significant bounce that Mrs. Clinton got out of her convention and said, holy smokes, I better really focus my message on the economy, jobs, and national security.
But that didn't get reported.
No, that didn't get reported. But once it was out there in the bloodstream, now there's no real need for an intervention at this moment.
Interesting.
But talking about Pence, traditionally, and this is an untraditional year, but traditionally, the person at the top of the ticket sits above the fray, and the vice presidential pick is the attack dog. This time around, it's flipped. Once again, totally unconventional.
Well, who's to say that that won't work, though? I mean, I guess that's what's confusing. Why does everybody think that they have a better idea when he's beaten? I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
It's not also just when we talk about who's the kind of defender of the base and who's the attack dog, it's not so much with Trump and Pence a matter of personalities and who can take more. I mean, one of the most interesting narratives to me about this whole election cycle so far has been how different they are on foreign policy. As someone who really is focused on foreign policy and national security issues, there's a big divide between the two of them. And so what's interesting is going to be how they can fuse their two disparate viewpoints, or how they can at least package them.
Do they need to, Julie?
Well, yeah, first of all, of course they need to. Everybody needs to get on the same page. But secondly, once a week, once every 2 weeks, we sit on this couch, and Trump may have had a moment where he stayed on message, and everybody says, oh, this is the pivot. This is the turning point for Donald Trump. This is it. And then lo and behold, I think I have a $1 bet with everybody that's ever said this, that within the next 24 hours, Donald Trump is going to come out and say something completely incendiary, off message, that's going to throw not just independents and Democrats and a lot of Republicans, but a lot of people in Washington who, I hate to say, you may hate the Washington establishment, you need them to get the
So does Mike Pence make up the difference?
Well, I don't think so. But look, this to me is also, I mean, Trump likes to win. Trump likes to win. He hates to lose.
For the record, most of us do.
Of course, but I mean, he's got. I mean, and you look at the comments that he made, and every time he made a comment months ago, right, when he made the comment about Senator McCain and POW, I thought, well, that's it. It's all going to come collapsing down. Not at all. But I think for the first time, he's now seen in this kind of the post-Democratic convention, his numbers really take a hit, and Hillary has a 10-point lead. And I think this is going to be that moment, right, where he realizes, okay, what I was doing before, everybody said it wasn't going to work, but he still went up in the polls.
Here's the problem.
This is the difference.
I think, and I truly believe this, I think he has a pathological need to talk about himself. I think he needs to insert himself into every story. He should not be talking about himself. He should be talking about the economy and its effect on the middle class. He should be talking about national security and its effect on the American people. But he can't help himself. He needs to constantly bring it back to himself. And until he gets over that pathological need, there is no way he's ever going to get a message.
And that is something that I've been talking about, that this campaign from this point on cannot be about Donald Trump. It's got to be about America. All right, hold that thought. Meanwhile, political analysts say Democrats are uniting, not so much around Hillary Clinton, but a shared fear of Donald Trump. Clinton and running mate Tim Kaine both fueling that fear on the campaign trail, arguing that their opponent would not only be a bad president, but would also do irreparable damage to the United States, and citing the tone of the Republican convention to make their case.
I personally think that Donald Trump poses a serious threat to our democracy.
I was saying it was kind of dark and pessimistic, and some people said, wow, that's a dark picture of the United States. And I said, no, that wasn't a picture of the United States. That was a self-guided tour through the mind of Donald J. Trump, and that's a scary place to be.
There is no doubt in my mind that Donald Trump is unqualified to be president and unfit to be commander-in-chief.
So, Ben, here is the irony as I see it. Coming out of the Republican convention, Mrs. Clinton and the Democrats were criticizing Donald Trump and the Republicans for running a very dark, fear-based kind of campaign. And yet now Mrs. Clinton seems to have turned the tables and is adopting that kind of fear-based messaging that, oh, you don't want Donald Trump. He's an unknown quantity. He's a cowboy. We don't know what he's going to do. The American people have very legitimate worries and concerns and, frankly, fears, whether it's ISIS or a weakening economy, maybe going into a recession. What's your view of the Clinton approach right now in terms of the campaign?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. And the fact is they want to talk about what it's going to be like scary if this happens, if Trump is president. What they don't want to talk about, let's talk about how scary it is right now over the last 10 years of our policies, and certainly under Obama. Right? I mean, you look at the economy. You know, the middle class hasn't seen a wage rise in 15 years. You know, corporate profits are up almost 200%. Wages are up 3.4. We've turned policemen into bad people. We have almost, you know, regular terrorist attacks here in this country. You know, you look at the economy overall. You look at our security situation overall. Let's not talk about the last 8 years or the last 10 years of this country, because that would be an admonishment on President Obama and Hillary that wants to have a third,
And Julie, isn't it true that she can't run on her record? Therefore, she has to make it a referendum on Donald Trump.
Well, I keep saying this and everybody laughs at me, but in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And in this case, she's the one-eyed man. She's not beloved. She's not trusted.
Well, we laugh because that visual is really scary.
On every level, I might on every level. But it happens to be true in this case. Look, the thing that she's doing and that he's not doing is she's not going to talk about it. He should be talking about it. You just laid out a great argument for Donald Trump. He's not laying it out himself. So she's taking the vacuum, which he's created, by scaring the bejesus out of people and telling them that under this unstable autocrat, this is what the world is going to look like. Instead of him focusing on issues, in which case he probably would be a lot further ahead, he's absolutely taking the bait and defending himself. Why would he do this as opposed to turning it around on her? He has nobody around him who knows how to run a campaign. He has nobody around him who can tell him what to do. That's the problem for
Actually,
him.
he does have some good people behind him. The question is, you know, what are those conversations like right now? We don't know because we're not inside the campaign. But I will say this, the law and order talk and the security talk that came out post the RNC convention per mainly Donald Trump, she had to bend to that. The police union that came out against her, and then one, and then two of them, based on some things that she had said previously. So, I mean, she had to answer back on that. That was necessary. And yes, it mimicked what he did because it worked. He got a 6-7 point in some polling bounce out of that. Of course she did.
And how do you expect, Jillian, Donald Trump to push back on this? I mean, the whole argument that he is an unknown quantity and that people ought to be afraid of the kind of leadership he would exert. How do you expect him to counter that?
Fear the unknown. If I was an advisor to Donald Trump, I would advise him to counter that by putting forth as much substantive detail as you possibly can. You have ideas about how you want to fight ISIS, how you want to degrade and ultimately defeat them in Iraq and Syria.
But he doesn't want to tip his hand. So in your national security, so how do you do that?
Every presidential candidate from the dawn of time has been able to put forth real plans.
Except for President Obama, who told us he would never put boots on the ground. So now the enemy already knows that.
For example, we knew that he wanted to close of the issues that were important to President Obama, we knew how he was going to handle them. We knew he was going to make closing Guantanamo Bay a priority from day one. He laid out how he was going to do it. So the point being, when these issues are really important to candidates, there's a way to give people enough information to have confidence in you without giving away state secrets.
But perhaps that's Mike Pence's job. Maybe his job is to go out, steady the ship, reassure the Republican base, but also project certainty and predictability.
Who's got their finger on the nuclear button, Mike Pence or Donald Trump? I mean, seriously, he's the commander-in-chief. It's not Mike Pence.
Has that ever really been an issue in anybody's lifetime? Like
it certainly is when Donald Trump is out there potentially saying, according to Joe Scarborough,
I want to go to you on
whether
this.
that's the case or not.
Has it ever come up? Like, I've not heard a president say, well, you know, I took out the football and I had to.
Well, look, I mean,
you're going to have a national security team. You're
asked,
going to have a whole cabinet. I mean, it's not.
Well, you asked in my lifetime. I don't think so. However, if I do remember my history classes correct, I mean, I think during the Cuban Missile Crisis,
Absolutely.
I mean, that was about the closest point to where, you know, we came to actually somebody pressing that button. Look, my concern with Trump when it comes to these plans with defeating terrorism is create an overall strategy and stay on message and go, right? I mean, so far we've heard, let's go in, let's take the oil, let's put troops in, let's not put troops, let's just bomb the heck out of the place. So I would advocate Mr. Trump to, yes, let's put out a plan to go, but I think us expecting to have some, you know, completely detailed, nuanced plan is not going to be, the bottom line, he just needs to stay on message. This isn't an intellectual election, this is an emotional one, bottom line.
Nuclear button issue. That's what I want to know. Do you trust him on that?
Right now, no, I don't. But I don't trust Hillary Clinton either. So, you know, to be perfectly frank, if I had to pick, you know, I'm going to pick the Republican side than I am the Democrat.
President Obama is going to the Pentagon today to meet with 18+ countries. Documents from 2014 show the group was only in 7 countries at one point. Now the map shows the terrorists fully operational in 18+. And they are taking root in 6 others, I would imagine, as we speak. So this idea of whack-a-mole, something that Ambassador John Bolton and I were talking about on the air a couple of days ago, where you pound them into the ground in one place, pop up someplace else. He says it's complicated with ISIS because they can do that, and they have a nesting ground in Raqqa, Syria.
Exactly, and so correct, and we've got, you know, they've got their home base that exists in Iraq, and they've got their home base that exists in Syria, and yes, you know, the Iraqi and with our support in Syria and the Iranians, unfortunately, and their militias, we have been taking some of the you know, some of the territory away from ISIS, which is a big deal because that's where they get most of their revenue from. I mean, we have broken, you know, the back a little on their oil, the black market oil, but most of their revenue right now is coming from, you know, taxing the people that they control. So the more land we take away, that's a good thing. However, you know, they're not stupid. I mean, they recognized that they were losing some of their power positions, so they started flowing their people, you know, through Turkey, you know, through Syria, through Turkey into Europe. You know, those countries that they show on the map, yes, there's 18 where they're trying to establish their caliphates and 6 more that they're creating. But that doesn't take into account even, you know, the sleeper, you know, through the Syrian refugee program that they utilized in Europe. That doesn't take that into account, the number of those that have gotten into Europe and they're moving around. And that's a dangerous thing. You know, just to me, when I watch, I keep going over that, you know, if you remember Secretary Kerry a few weeks ago compared, you know, air conditioners and refrigerators, you know, the lethality of air conditioners to ISIS. Let's start by just, you know, removing, you know, just that kind of a philosophy, you know, out, and we can actually start to get serious about a plan, but it's not going to come from this president.
So the U.S. Intelligence community claims that the military has reclaimed up something like 45% of territory that ISIS held in Iraq and Syria, and as Ben mentioned, that's hugely important, right? Because ISIS, remember, considers itself, has this grandiose illusion of itself as a state, so they're able to generate revenue that way. Every time we can push back against that idea, it's helpful. But it's important to also remember, and I think that sometimes the U.S. government is short-sighted, their fallback plan is to revert to being a terrorist organization and carrying out murders across the globe. And that's what we're seeing now. So while John Kerry is, in a sense, right to say that they are sort of panicking because they're not doing as well on the ground in Iraq and Syria as they'd like to, it doesn't make them, unfortunately, any less dangerous for the rest of the world.
That panic can manifest itself into a bigger killing machine.
And I think
that's what's happening.
Yeah, and what's so scary about what both of you have just said is that it's, forget the Syrian refugees, I'm not forgetting it, but put aside the issue of the Syrian refugees, most of these attacks in Europe have been carried out by first or second generation European nationals. So this extends just beyond a military solution. It extends even beyond a refugee solution. It extends into an assimilative solution, which the Europeans are not prepared and never had been prepared to do effectively in this country. It is, but not to the extent as it's happening there. And that's the problem. The problem is the Europeans, since Algeria, if not earlier, have done a horrible job of assimilating their minorities, their Muslims, and that you see what's happening now as the second and third generation are rising up.
All right, controversy is growing over Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps. And he's been chosen as the flag bearer for the United States at the Rio Games opening ceremony. Phelps's athletic prowess is undisputed. But why critics are now saying it is his reputation that is the problem for them, and the message they say it sends. Swimmer Michael Phelps has been chosen as the flag bearer to represent Team USA during the Rio Olympics opening ceremony. Phelps, the most decorated Olympian of all time. That is not the controversy. He won 18 Olympic gold medals. He also has a little bit of a past, as you may know. Phelps was arrested twice for drunken driving in 2004 and 2014, and was caught on camera smoking marijuana in 2008. He has since entered rehab and given up alcohol, and he became a father for the first time this year. But some critics say he should not be the face of the United States on Friday. Your thoughts?
I completely disagree. First of all, this is a great redemption story. He had a problem. He addressed it. He took care of it. His daughter is adorable. I saw her on TV during his trials. I think she was really cute. Why not? Why not say this is somebody who is an amazing athlete, had some fallback in his life, took care of it? That's the American dream. We believe in second chances in this country.
Monica?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the land of second chances. This is also the land of merit. And if any belongs as the face, the United States face of these games, it's Michael Phelps with those gazillion gold medals around his neck.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, America loves a turnaround story, and I think this is fantastic to see. I do, there is part of me that certainly as a father of young kids that see a DUI just, even as much as 2 years ago, that makes me a little bit nervous. But that's a personal thing for his life, to me, in terms of representing the United States, this is a guy that's won, 475 gold medals. I mean, something absurd. I think he deserves to have that spot, but doesn't mean that, we shouldn't hope for the best for him.
Debbie Phelps' mom, I sat down with her a few years ago, right around the time that he was having some of his problems in 2008 with marijuana. And, they test you, so that was a problem for him as an athlete. And it was interesting to hear her talk about the journey and how many hours he'd spent day after day getting ready for these big moments in his life.
She also kicked his butt when he was arrested. I mean, she was a single mother, very strong, very, very big presence in his life, and she called him on the carpet.
Good. That's
exactly what mom should do. Mrs. Phelps.
I would just caution against Ben what you said, which is that his DUI history is a personal story. A DUI.
Well, I meant that in a personal thing. It troubles me in the fact that, look, I'm on the road too with my kids. So anybody with a DUI that's behind a wheel, but look, I went to a boarding school called Petty, which was, it's about an hour and a half.
They were my school competitors. I didn't know that. Wow.
And they were, I mean, that place has phenomenal swimmers. So I used to see these kids getting up at 3 a.m. every day to go down.
Their work ethic is
I worry that this encourages a pattern we have in this country of forgiving celebrities and letting them get off with things like DUIs. For example, I remember the Lindsay Lohan stories. If I had been arrested 75 times with the DUI, I would be in jail.
I suddenly see a new group popping up called Celebrities Are People Too. I don't know. I could be wrong. All right, we'll move on. Experience on the show. Jen Collins, wow. Former Army Green Beret. My dad says you're always one, so I need to correct that. I know he's watching.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your dad's service as well.
Thank you.
Especially being
pass that on to him.
Thank you.
He's a big fan. Well, so as we kind of go out of this, what's interesting too is you're going to join us for Outnumbered Overtime. Are you ready?
I'm not sure.
To go digital? I mean, there are no commercials. There are no rules. It's on Facebook Live.
Okay.
Outnumbered FNC. Drop on by and talk to us and leave some comments too. We're back on TV at noon Eastern tomorrow. Happening now.